Well, again, Lewis, thanks for taking the time to chat. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Lewis Castle. I'm best known as the co-founder of Westwood Studios. I've been making games since 1982, and I've done a bunch of other stuff as well. I guess I'm most notable as having been successful in multiple creative, business, and technical roles. So I'm very excited to talk to you.
Awesome. No, I appreciate that. And yeah, as I mentioned before, I think it'd just be really fun to talk a bit about just business in general when it comes to artists. Like, what is your take on where people may fall short when it comes to, really understanding the value of at least understanding how their business or their industry may work? Because I think that, again, whether it's games, film, or any other area, typically you're working in a commercial industry. You're dealing with clients, you're dealing with invoicing, really basic stuff. But at the same time, I think that a lot of people neglect to learn to negotiate or just really protect themselves in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I suppose, advice is always hard to give because everybody's situation is a little different. But my learning and my experience was myself and my business partner, Brett, we were working for a company and doing most of the work ourselves, in the sense, at least what we thought of most of the work. We were doing all the programming, all the design, even to some extent negotiating the terms of the contract, because we were doing the scoping of the work and such. But we weren't doing the financial terms, and we really didn't have any other business activity. So no payroll, no insurance, none of that stuff. So we had the opportunity with Westwood to start a company based on a contract, and we negotiated the contract and then discovered that there's all this other stuff that has to exist. I've embarrassed Brett many times by telling this story, but when we got our first check from Epix, EPYX, not Epic, we got
I remember them.
First check to Westwood Associates, and we were super excited, and we went to look at it and said, well, how do we even cash that? We were very, very naive in the beginning. But I think that the biggest strength that most people have in starting businesses and entrepreneurs is actually not knowing what they don't know. It's weird. Once you know all the things that you have to do and how complicated it can be, it kind of shies you off from it. But I would encourage creatives, if they feel like they're they have the business acumen to run their own business, I'd encourage them to do so, because I think that there's a lot to learn by doing that. Even if you ultimately decide not to do it all yourself, you're making an informed decision about the types of things you just don't want to spend your day doing. And then frankly, I found that being creative, technically and creative, really benefited me in business, because it gave me sort of flexibility. And because you are the person doing the work and you're the person negotiating the deal, you find yourself being able to make some really interesting trade-offs that have enriched me personally, not just financially, but from an experience point of view.
Yeah, I think that even from a more of a leadership perspective, the more that you at least understand how things function, the more that you can actually navigate and do what you need to do, rather than being like, all right, I don't understand the business side, or if you're an artist, not understanding at least how the developers are working, or vice versa. I think that the more that you at least know 10%, it's going to help you be able to communicate better, as well as understand the requirements going into it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the old adage that the best employees are former bosses, right? Because you just understand a little bit more the other person's point of view. And I also think it gives you some great insights into what the other parts of an organization might be contributing. And I have to say that the technology nowadays, I'm at Green Park now, and our VP of Ops is great. Jen, she does a great job. What's amazing to me is how many different kinds of tools are available to starting a business and running a business that take a lot of the, I would say back in the day when I was doing it, take a lot of that heavy lifting away, and the amount of information that's available out there because of the internet it just makes it even easier for you to be your own boss. And be your own employer, if you will, be able to employ other people, because games especially, very, very difficult to do all by yourself. At some point, you're probably going to want to contract somebody. there are a few people in the world that are still capable of doing everything, art, coding, design, music, and all. But that's getting rarer and rarer as the quality bar keeps going up. And you have to be at least competent in all of those things. You don't have to be great at all of them. You might be a great designer and have competent music and pretty good art and still be able to get away with it. But at some point, most people are going to have to, get involved with somebody else. And so it's good to have those business chops.
Do you think it is a pretty organic process? Like what you said before is something I've heard so often, which is usually in hindsight that if I'd known how much work it would be going in, I probably would never have done it. But that's the beauty of naivete in a lot of ways, is that you're looking at what's in front of you rather than the big picture.
Yeah, it's like climbing a mountain, right? If you've done any really strenuous or difficult task in your life, anything, oftentimes the effort, the journey and all is, you look back and go, wow, I wish I would have enjoyed that journey a little bit more because there was a lot of effort. And one of the observations I've made is it has to do with success as well. If you're successful at an endeavor, it's weird because you're less likely to be so eager to go try it again. But there's something kind of really, I don't know, maybe crazy about entrepreneurs in general, is that they want to take risk and they want to be successful, but they also, if they fail, it's that the ones that keep going at it are the ones that eventually succeed, and they will keep going. Like the old story I used to tell people is, I've in the video games business in the very early days, in the late 80s and early 90s, and everybody I knew that had a successful studio was not even the slight bit interested in starting another one, right? They just no interest whatsoever. But everybody who had one that didn't quite make it or failed was eager to go do it again. So it is a funny thing that once you are successful, and you have an appreciation for everything it takes to get there, including the luck, because that's another thing that's kind of terrifying. Yeah. It's a lot harder to go take that on again, because you're much more knowledgeable about all the things you're going to have to go through to get there and what you're going to have to trade off for success. I haven't met very many. There have been a few one-hit wonders or overnight successes. The vast majority of your overnight successes were an overnight success after 10 years of trying, right? That's usually the case.
Well, it's always that iceberg metaphor. Yeah. In fact, I just literally watched like some YouTube clip of an iceberg flipping over, and I was like, yeah, of course, it's always heavier at the bottom. Yeah, I was like, I got to watch this. It's definitely something that, you don't realize like how much work is involved. And I'm pretty sure last time we would have talked about failure, and in fact, I definitely would have asked you this because I'd be curious what your thoughts were on it. But I think that a lot of people who do quit, typically they see failure as being the showstopper rather than, part of the process. So,
yeah, I think I was very lucky. I only had a couple of near misses that were not very painful. And so the first company that we put a lot of energy into was Westwood. And ultimately, although there were some challenging moments and times where we might have gone away, ultimately we were very successful. And so, you kind of don't have the same learnings that you do from other failures. And since that time, I've been involved in other things that haven't worked well and some that have worked really well. And I think I'm starting to live a little bit more of that, learn from failure than I did in the beginning. But I do think that it is, when you think about even though the company on a very global level or meta level was successful, we did many, many projects that didn't work. And we had things that failed financially. Usually we were, because we had no money, because we had to build it this way. Usually we weren't out money, we were just out opportunity and time. But it was pretty scary at times. And so I think we learned from that. We were in a recession at the time, and the industry had gone through some pretty bad blows. And so we built a company when frugality was really required. And because of that, I think that's always been with me. It stays with me to this day. I'm really very resistant to spend a lot of money on the come, as it were. And lots of folks tell me all the time, I hear it all the time, well, you need to spend money to make money. I'm like, well, maybe you need to make money to make money. And then if you make money, you can actually afford to spend money to make more money. It's always been a hard thing for me to take other people's money, because it's just such a very, very, I think it's such a huge moral imperative to try to make it turn out well, and not take undue risks. Yeah.
And at the same time, like, I think the beauty, which you mentioned before, with a lot of times now, like making something smaller, you can do that vertical slice to initially get that concept out there and bootstrap the whole thing, rather than, as you were mentioning, you overpromise and underdeliver is always a risk. If you are saying, give me all the money to go and make something big and hope there's a return on it.
Yeah, I think that's what's always been appealing to me. I can't speak for all entrepreneurs. There's some people that are just brilliant at going out and raising tons of money, and sometimes it's successful and sometimes it's not, and they're able to go do it again and again and again because they have a hit record of at least being successful occasionally. And I understand all the mechanics of that as both an investor and a creative. But from my point of view, I've always tried to find the alternative solution where something where you can bootstrap it and at least not go through too much cash before you're making some sort of cash flow. And that goes back to the business side of it, which is not where I started. I mean, I started as a creative and doing artwork and doing programming. And so it was really more of a necessity. It's like, well, if I want to keep doing this, we have to be able to make at least enough money to pay ourselves, something we can live on. That's another problem too, is, you asked about advice. I don't know if it's advice. I would tell anybody who's young, who has time and has very little to lose, that is a wonderful time to take risk in your life. And not feel badly if it doesn't work out. There's so many people who set these incredibly high expectations on themselves of saying, I'm 22, just out of college, or maybe even younger, and it's my first venture, it has to be successful, I need to be a billionaire by the time I'm 30. And when you start putting those kind of goals on yourself, I think it's not really quite the right way to think about it. I think the way to think about it is, I'm young, I have nothing but time. In some cases, if I lose, I can even go move back with my parents or a friend or whatever. I can sit on a couch, and I don't have this incredible blast radius of negative impact if I fail. That is the best time to take risk. And it's funny because we were in that space, and all we could ever think about is how we had to be very careful and very risk adverse. And reality was, we could have taken a lot more risk. We could have been much more aggressive, and maybe should have. We sold our company very early in its life cycle. We got a really good deal, which I could talk about later, and probably another piece of advice. But yeah, my biggest thing would be, if you're young and you've got time, take risks, take chances. But don't be discouraged if you fail. Take a risk, work really hard to succeed, but expect to fail. I mean, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's your power. That's your superpower when you're young, is you don't have that same kind of massive negative impact you do as you get older.
I think you're right. Like you're definitely right, but let's just dumb it down to the simplest entrepreneur stigma of like, I gotta, make a unicorn every time as soon as I start out. And I think a lot of the time, if you're setting these heavy expectations on yourself, then it doesn't matter how amazing you're doing, it's never enough. And I think that, for certain people, you might be doing more amazing than everybody else, but if you're comparing yourself to the other people out there, the Richard Bransons, then you're always going to look at yourself as a failure. Like a good analogy is that so many days I feel like I've got nothing done, and I look back and I'm like, well, I probably got about 3 days of work done, but instead I'm the stupid person who's writing, on the little bit of negative space still on my notepad, some extra tasks. So no matter what I do, it's always going to be looking at it from a negative point of view. And that's how I think a lot of people interpret their success, is they're not making $1 billion tomorrow. They're not, winning.
Yeah, it's imposter syndrome, right? That's the terminology that's used a lot, which is, maybe that's a little different, but it's the idea that, I'm successful, but I don't feel successful because I always feel like I didn't do enough to deserve it, or I'm not as good as people think I am. And it's really hard to get out of that space sometimes, especially if you've had a couple of knocks. It's difficult to see all the positive things that have happened. And it's just good sometimes to sit back and, write an honest CV or write an honest list of accomplishments and go, wow, actually this thing may not have worked out. Maybe even the last few things haven't worked out, but my God, if you look back on balance, all the things that have tried, wow, so many have been successful, that it gives you that courage to go forward. There's a really necessary point of clarity that even as a young person or as an experienced person, that's required, which is understanding what it is you want out of the effort that you're going to put in. And people always ask me about that. They go, oh, you've started multiple companies. You've, turned $500 million into $1.5 billion companies, and you've done all this stuff. Don't you just want to go do that again? And the answer is yes, at times. And at other times, I'm just very, very happy that I'm working for a great company that is financially stable. And I love the work that I do, and I love the people I work with. And it's not necessary for me to go out and have to own it and run it. So it's kind of a mix of things, I suppose. And I think with each endeavor, it's really important to understand what you want out of that particular engagement. When I started with Westwood with Brett, I remember we had a really kind of poignant meeting where he said, well, what is it you really want? He was very point forward. He said, I want to create a big company and be successful. And I go, yeah, I just want to have fun. I'm at that point in my life where I just want to have a good time. And I mean, we were working 80-hour weeks. It's not like I was shy from working. That was my fun. I loved doing what I did. And it wasn't for the expectation of wealth or success. It was for the love of doing it. And I just feel so fortunate to have found something that was so engaging. And if you haven't found that passion, don't be shy to new opportunities. Try new things, because finding that passion is that's an amazing feeling. And I've done other things that I'm less passionate about that you can be successful at it. I had to be good at finance. I had to be good at a couple other things, but those I wasn't passionate about them. I found ways to encourage myself and found things interesting about them, but it really is kind of a forced fit, or creating has always been really, really a passion.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. And yeah, I think it's also something you can grow into over time. Like my old roommate when I was 17, he went on to create the company Half Brick, which created Fruit Ninja, which became a pretty big success. But really? I remember having a conversation with him when I was back in my teens, just about how he was saying he never wanted to work for anyone else. And he's just, for me, I just wanted to get a job in the industry and, work my way up. But he was adamant about wanting to be the boss from day one, which, it's an interesting perspective.
It's an interesting thought. So, going all the way back, I think what motivated us to start Westwood more than anything else was we didn't appreciate the value that the business side of things was bringing to the table, cultivating relationships, negotiating deals, et cetera, et cetera. And we found out the amount of money, and we were getting a very, very small portion, probably an unfairly small portion. And so there was more of an indignant feeling of like, well, hell, maybe we're not great at it. We can't be that bad where, it would cost that much of the equation. So yeah, there's a sort of, being my own boss wasn't really the goal. It was more about, I just want to go to work every day and love to do what I want to do and work at a place I want to work. And so we built our company around the culture of being a place each of us wanted to go to work every day for very, very long hours. And it's a funny, when that kind of purity comes out of it, you create a very unique situation. We were very fortunate in lots of ways too. Westwood was, being in Las Vegas, we were just far enough away from a lot of other places where we didn't have a revolving door on our talent pool. It forced us to cultivate people and work with them over a longer period of time. And when people did move, it made it more difficult for them to quickly leave. So we were both motivated to work at making it work out. So there's all sorts of little pieces that came in there. Not necessarily apply to every company, but I think going back to the nut of all this, or the real gem, is love what you do and make sure you're clear on what it is you want on the other side. If it's a big payout and it's you want to make sure that you're going to create a unicorn, start with the big idea. If you don't have that big idea, and it's like, I'm just going to make that thing that was made before better. It's like, probably not, right? You're going to get shorted on that one every time. Think like an investor. Think, well, what's the opportunity space? First of all, is it huge? It has to be huge if you're going to go for something like that. And is it being addressed? What's the competitive marketplace look like? What problem are you solving that hasn't been solved yet? And then finally, once you have those big ideas, because lots of people have great ideas, it's like, do you have the team? Do you have the people necessary to deliver that? And when you get all those questions right, actually the rest of it starts to fall in place pretty quickly. But those are really hard questions. With so many people out there trying so many things, it's difficult to find that unique space.
Yeah, I think also executing on it, because you meet so many people who say they got $1 million idea or $1 billion idea. It's like, that's cute. Like, I'm pretty sure everybody has those all day long, but your willingness to actually execute on it and have the perseverance to stick with it as well, rather than, I've got another idea over here, I want to pursue it too.
No, something people have all the time is like, I hear all the time, I have this idea for a game. And I'm like, I'm sure you do, right? And especially if you're a gamer, you probably have lots of ideas for games. They're probably mostly derivative, if you're going to be really honest about it. But at the same time, you might have some unique ideas, but the ability to execute is, wow, that's critical. That's the team part. You need to know what it is. Or if you don't have a team, how you're going to build it. That's another big learning of mine, which is, it's difficult to assemble a team to be a success. It's usually the second, third, fourth, fifth time somebody tries something as a group, or maybe it's not just a tries, but maybe it's just a lot of effort over time before they finally get their groove and it works. It takes a while to gel. It's pretty rare to just assemble a group of experts and put something out. I think Hollywood has gotten very, very good at that, which is shocking in a way, the way production companies work. You get a script, you put together a cast, you build in a bunch of people, you put them together, you throw them together on things, and they blow it all up at the end of the project. That's just, wow, that's just, it's, to me as a creator and a person that's created companies and groups, that just seems so challenging and wasteful, but it's the model, and it's the model that's prevalent. And that being said, you look at like great directors, almost all of them have a group of actors and behind the scenes people they work with on a regular basis, because they do want to have that muscle memory and that history. Yeah,
and communication, having that relationship is really important. I just had the visual effects supervisor for Dune on, and obviously Denis, the director, they worked together on several films, Blade Runner, which obviously you'd be familiar with that IP, and quite a few others. And that's just it. You kind of, I think, especially when it comes to management, the more that you can build that vocabulary with the people you work with, whether it's above you or below you, it means that they understand what you mean when you say make it 10% bigger or make it a bit more dynamic, or whatever elusive, meaningless words you want to throw at it. So freeing them up, like letting those people go, you're losing weeks, months of them learning, what you really want. So I think that's priceless to have that understanding.
Yeah, that, and there's another one that's really, I don't know what the full impact is going to be because of COVID. I love the fact that people have learned to work remote, but there's a missing piece as well, which I call social capital, which is just, we're building companies now and launching products, and there are teams where, you've never even met the person physically that you're working with. And it's amazing that the world has learned to be productive with tools that we're using right now, right? That's amazing, and it's wonderful, and technology is enabling people from all over the world to collaborate together, which is great. On the other hand, I can't help but feel that there is definitely a missing component of being physically in the same space, and just having some social time together that isn't strictly business, that helps you build that capital. And when I think of what was really special about Westwood, it was a magical place, was that almost all of the founding members or early members were friends at the time, or became friends. And there was a very, very, very tight social bond there, which was a fantastic benefit. It was also very painful too, because if you had somebody that wasn't working out, it was very difficult to try to have a conversation of they need to move on, because my God, they're not just your employee or not just a valued person who's been there for a long time, but they're, truly your friend, and it makes it very difficult. So there's pluses and minuses. These are all balancing acts.
Just touching on social capital, because that's something I've talked a lot about in the podcast, and I feel that some people get the value and other people think relationships are just relationships, whatever. But especially when you're starting out, if you don't know anyone, you're really competing with everyone, and it's a bottleneck. There's going to be 5 positions available and 200 people applying, but usually, especially like I said in the beginning, it's going to be the relationships that you've nurtured that are going to get you those first opportunities to get you going. For you, like, what advice would you give for anyone who either wants to make it more practical in terms of like, well, how do I do cold outreach? How do I nurture a relationship or find mentors? Obviously, these are much bigger conversations, but what advice would you give to those people?
Well, I think each one runs a little differently. If you're looking for mentors, it doesn't hurt to shoot for the moon, right? You might get Richard Branson to write you back, but probably not, right? Probably it's something about find the person, and I would encourage, instead of looking to the particular industry or thing like that, find the person that you respect, and try to really deep dive. Why do you respect them? Why do you respect their judgment or their attitude or their work ethic? And be more targeted and say, wow, if I want a mentor that's going to teach me about creativity, I probably don't want to use the mentor who's my best idea of work efficiency. That may not be the same thing. So try to align your mentors with the thing that you're trying to, what you admire most of them. When it comes to working with other people, I think the way I've managed to get along with so many different people in so many different walks of life is I try to really be like kind of their biggest fan. I just want to know who they are, what they're about, and genuinely become interested in what they're interested in. It helps to be ADHD because I never know what I'm going to find next that's interesting. But it's that idea that when you genuinely and authentically understand at least some part of that person's motivation or drive, you start to get a better understanding of them. And it might be that maybe you're working with some folks that are from India and you're like, I don't know anything about cricket, but they love cricket. And I'm kind of being very
I'm Australian, so we play cricket.
Copish about this, but honestly, most people in India really do like cricket.
Yeah.
But if you find somebody like that, you say, well, if this really matters to somebody, it's really important to them. If every time I'm on a video conference, I see this big sports team behind them, it's important to at least understand that part of them or what it is that drives them. And it can also be a great touch point for building social capital, because you say, hey, you know what? I really don't know anything about that. Would you mind telling me a little about it? But it must be genuine. It can't be a lack of authenticity. People will very quickly sniff out, a kiss up. That's not really what anybody wants, up or down the ladder. You don't want faint praise or false praise. You want somebody that actually is demonstrating a willingness to open themselves up. And something I think I've learned a lot, maybe it's always a growing thing because I believe you're always learning, is being a little bit more vulnerable. It's one of the things that when I was younger, I don't think I really thought much about, but as you get older, you start to realize as you more experience that leaving yourself vulnerable for a little bit of hurt or a little bit of disappointment is really kind of the best way to grow. If you're not vulnerable, if you're not sharing, if you're just trying to learn for the purpose of building capital, all that, it becomes it feels very exploitive. You have to actually kind of be able to willing to give and take a bit.
I love that. That's great advice. One thing you alluded to earlier, which maybe you'll still remember, you were mentioning in terms of selling your business, there might be a lesson in there.
Quite a few. Yeah, I did. No, I think the first one is, when we went to sell Westwood the very first time, we did end up selling Westwood 4 times, which is kind of weird. When we went the first time, the reason we were doing it was very financially motivated. We realized that every product we had at this point was starting to cost so much money that actually we weren't even getting enough money in the upfront royalties anymore. We had broken our basic model of business, which was make sure we make at least enough to keep the lights on, and then we'll take a participation on the upside, knowing that your upside participation has to go down if you do that, because you don't get to have both ends of the scale. But it's got to a point where the creative work that we wanted to do was so expensive that most of our publishing partners just weren't willing to cover the bill. So we were putting our own dollars in to get there. And you could see pretty quickly where this was going. And it would just take one big failure and we'd be catastrophic. And at that point, we had about 30 people, 28, 29 people working for us. And we cared about all these people, they were our friends. And so we were like, well, we're looking at an acquisition, not because we are necessarily looking for all the benefits that could come from it, although clearly we would want that kind of synergy from a partner. We were doing it strictly because we wanted to be able to make sure the financial backing was there for us to continue to do these aspirational things we were doing. That was 1998. We had just, 1992. We had just finished, I think, Dune 2, or right in the process of finishing Dune, sorry. And we had a game called Kyrandia and some other stuff that was coming out that was, we had done Eye of the Beholders, which had been successful. So we were really at a point where our company was starting to launch into some really competitive frontline premium titles, and they were very expensive. And we just said, we need pockets behind us. And so we had 2 options. We had the option of going with kind of a great buyout from the economics of the business. We would have gotten a huge payout from Sierra Online that would have set myself up as millionaires and been awesome. Or we could take a lot less money up front, go with Richard Branson and Virgin, who cold called us. That's another funny story, but we could have gone with that. And we ultimately did the Virgin thing because we were able to remain in control of the company and remain both creative and business leaders. And looking back, I have to tell you, that was kind of crazy risky. we were a 30-person company. Both Brett and I had never run a big company, and we could see that the company was going to grow by leaps and bounds as soon as we had the capital to do it. And there's no guarantee that that would have worked out well for us, or that we as managers would have been able to grow with it. And we took a lot of risk with that, but ultimately that is what paid off, because we were, once again, able to take that risk. So we ended up selling the company. Then we kind of got it wrong in a lot of ways as creators, because we didn't get as good of a deal for ourselves. We indemnified and cost us a ton of money. It's a lot of history there, but it was a fraudulent suit. But because of the way we wrote the contract, we had to pay for everything, and Virgin was encouraged to spend as much as possible to defend it. So it basically wiped out what little money we made. We got basically cleaned out from that. But ultimately, we were paid well, and we had a big piece of the phantom equity going forward. So this is my lesson. All of this is a long story of just saying, look, if you are looking at a point where you're going to sell a company, which especially or an entity or an effort, which is largely built based on yourself, whether it be a medical practice or whether it be creative practice or just your own your workshop that might have 5 or 6 people, it really is important to be aligned with your purchaser and make sure that if you're successful, not just them, but you're also successful, because that alignment creates great motivation for both people to be very happy at the end of the day. And that was the genius of the Virgin deal was, if we had not been successful as a company, Brett and I would have basically given the company away. On the other hand, if we were successful, we would have been rewarded in ways that we would have never been rewarded had we just sold it point blank for the surface value of it. And so believe in yourself, and believe in the upside, and recognize you're taking risk, and it may not work out and you may fail. That's fine, but betting on that growth, or betting on the fact that you can be successful, is something I've always found rewarding, even if I fail, because then I can at least take the honest take and say, well, I bet on myself I could be successful. It wasn't successful. Lick your wounds, recalibrate, go try again.
That's so great. I think the quote from last interview you mentioned about Branson cold calling was, "Everything is for sale, my good boy."
Everything is for sale. Yeah. I thought I told that story before, but yes, everything is for sale.
Ed Glenn Stone's on the podcast, who was the host and creator of Undercover Billionaire, and I just remember him casually mentioning that Branson and him used to own an island together at one point. It's just, just casual, thing to throw in there. It's just like, okay, that's very normal. I'm curious in terms of like where you're at now. When you do look at new opportunities, like let's say that you were shifting into a new position at a new company, what typically do you look for? Obviously, there's the financial part, and you kind of already have answered this a little bit, but what do you typically look for at, knowing that you've got infinite opportunities? It's not like, oh my God, I got offered a job today. It's which one is the opportunity cost?
It's a funny thing. My wife and I have this conversation all the time. What are you looking for? What are you going to do? And the reality is, I think it's not static. It changes all the time, right? So I work for a big company for a while, and I enjoy the fact that I've got these great resources and great people. And then there's always friction that comes with that, or there's always just cost when it comes to working with large companies and working in large teams and all that. And at some point you just go, oh my God, I just want to try that startup thing again. And then you do it and you remember why that's so hard, and maybe you don't want to do that again. And I go all the way back when Westwood was growing, and we did some really crazy variety. We would do like family kids games, and then we'd go and do really dark Circuit's Edge, dark future, kind of gritty and even seedy in some ways. And we'd be bouncing back and forth between these things. And it's you can only do so much Monopoly and Donald Duck, and then you pretty much just want to go to a war game, right? It's that oscillation between things. So getting back to the question, I think what I look for with each new opportunity is, at that point in my life, what am I trying to get out of it? So the advice I gave earlier, which is be very clear on what you want. And so sometimes just because you want it and just because it looks great and you get in there, it just doesn't work out that way. And you realize when you walk in the door, oh, I was very clear. I wanted A, B, and C. And you walk in and you go, yep, not going to get any of those. I feel like in for a penny, in for a pound, once you've signed, you do your best to make it successful, and you give it as much time as you can. Short of being driven crazy. I'm just not a quitter. I don't like to leave things halfway done. So I'll probably, if it's a fault, I'll probably stay with something long past the point where it was fun, because I just want to try to be successful at it. Even if it's not working, I'll grind at it, because Somebody believed in me, somebody gave faith in me, and I just want to try to make it work. My best advice for people is follow opportunity. I always hear this a lot. I hear a lot. I wish I had had the opportunities. I wish somebody had given me the chance. And I got to tell you, I think opportunity is knocking all the time. It's just most people don't want to listen. And they certainly don't like the when they open the door, it's a big scary monster on the other side. They slam it closed really fast. They go, oh God, I can't do that. Oh, that would be too risky. And I'm like, really? Are you sure it's too risky? Are you sure it's not maybe just the right amount of risk? And so that's what I look for. I look for, at the time in my life, how much risk am I willing to take for the kind of upside? And am I going to really enjoy? Am I going to thoroughly put myself into something? Because that full contact sport is where I've always found the most fun.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mentioned Glenn Stone just seconds ago, but that was actually something I asked him because I get frustrated when I see people saying I'm looking for that opportunity of a lifetime. If I just get that one opportunity, and I think it's kind of a muscle that the more that you start paying attention, you realize there's opportunity every day. And if for those who are more aggressive, you can go and create opportunity every day. And that was something with his answer. He said that he doesn't understand why no one sees the opportunities that he sees, and it frustrates him to no end because he'll walk into a grocery store or anywhere and he's constantly, looking at all these different ways that they could be doing things better. So
I see that all the time too. There was a period of my life where I was into operations a lot, both at Westwood and other places. And it's a weird thing when you start getting into operations and efficiency. Every time you turn around, you just see inefficiency. It's like you can't help it, and that's funny. Like that is opportunity though. That, like, let's face it, many years ago you could be standing on a street. I did it. Like I stood in the parking lot of EA waiting for a taxi that never showed up, and I'm like, oh my God, there's got to be a better solution than this, And if you think about it, that was opportunity, right? That could have been the idea that's inspired an Uber-like app at that point. People have these all the time, epiphanies of life would be so much better if blank. I just wish you could do a blank, but they're not listening. Like they're not tuned into the fact that might be the opportunity, and maybe they actually have the skill set to deliver it. So that, whenever you're really frustrated with the world and you go, oh my God, I can't believe this is so broken, you might want to look at that really carefully. Maybe that's your next opportunity. Maybe that's the place where you could do something different. Might be too, at the end of the day, there's some great games out there where it was like, oh, I can't believe nobody's made a game that does this and this. And it's usually those very easy to describe interactions that become hits.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the rule of business, right? If you can't put your business plan on a napkin, it's too complex. So,
Exactly. Yep.
If your pitch it's kind of like this and this, if you're already going the wrong direction. I guess again, this is going to put you on the spot. In terms of looking back at past mistakes you've made, whether beginning your career all the way to today, getting on this call. What are ones that stood out as being major lessons that you've kept with you?
There's always reasons, right? Douglas Adams had a story. Go look it up. Really funny. And there's always reasons. For reasons. You go to do something, and I wish I had that little advisor on my shoulder. When you go to do something and you do it for reasons, and very quickly you realize those reasons are no longer valid. I wish I had that something in my brain that allowed me to assess and cut bait. And I'm just not that. I'm just so freaking stubborn. I can't stand myself sometimes. I just won't give up. When I'm given something and it's not, I just try harder. That's not really healthy. I wish when I look back at things that I've just weren't successful, they were almost never because I do these two. I was always too stubborn to realize it wasn't working and to reassess.
Bang the hammer harder.
It's like if they don't understand me, I'll yell louder. It's really not healthy. And I don't know how that's nice or not. If it was kind of very negative, I tend to give people positive sharing. Share that most of the time things have not worked out for me. way before they ultimately closed. And I realized okay, it didn't work out. I knew it wasn't working. And way before that, I could have walked away and had lots of opportunities. So just because I'm so freaking stubborn, I won't give up. And I think that is a great quality when you're pursuing excellence or pursuing success. It is not a good quality when you're in a downward spiral and you really need to get out.
Is there any kind of best practices you would implement in a newer version of yourself, hindsight version, in terms of whether it's to check in every 3 months on where things are at or whatever.
I thought a lot about this recently, and I think what there's like the first 100 days, and there's always I read a lot of books around management because I didn't go to management school. Then it was all self-taught. And I think there's a really good one, which is you start a new opportunity. You're full of enthusiasm and optimism. Go into your calendar in the future. Put things in the future. I think I'm going to be here at this time. This is why I'm doing it. And just stick it in your calendar and forget you put it there. Because then sometime in the future you're going to trip upon that thing sitting in your calendar. And I haven't done this yet. But I thought about this, and I thought, this is a really good idea of just kind of putting a check on myself, saying, hey, check in on yourself. Did you are you grinding at this point? Are you still happy? Are you doing what you want to do?
I was reading a book a while back. There was like a website somewhere that you can actually email yourself a year from now. And so the whole point is to kind of project where you want to be, and then exactly what you just said, a chance to reflect on well, okay, I thought I'd be doing all this. Is that a positive thing or a negative thing? So yeah, maybe I gotta try it myself.
I think writing a letter to yourself that you're giving me clarity I had about, which is I should do this, which is here's all the reasons I'm getting in, and things change. And the problem is very insidious. It's the boiling frog syndrome. You don't really feel it until you look back and go, oh my god, there was a point changed, and I knew it was, and I just didn't pay attention. Right. So future self. Writing a note to your future self. I think a really good technique, and I'm going to do it as soon as we're off the
This sounds absolutely silly, but something that I help my wife with her business and a few close colleagues of mine as well, and they've always mentioned you give really great advice, and I thought, I'm not so good at giving myself good advice, and I actually thought of an exercise of what if I emailed myself and replied to myself with my questions, and whether that would trick my brain into actually looking at things from an outside perspective. So as silly as it sounds, I'm actually really curious to see whether I can say, well, okay, now I can see the problems that are going on that when you're in the trenches you're not really looking at the same way.
Again, it's that little thing, well, this is okay. It's like you sort of death by 1,000 cuts. You give up your passion one chick at a time. It's usually not that you suddenly become the thing you loathe, right? There's all those old adages is you live long enough to be the villain, right?
That's right.
But I think it really comes down to finding that inspiration again, and I think making a note to yourself in the future is a really good idea.
That's awesome.
I'm going to do it. I haven't tried it, so
write it down. So you mentioned before books. I'm just curious, again, because I do think that all of this is relevant to artists, whether they realize it or not. And some of the best artists I know, we end up nerding out about leadership books or management books. And I've found that even as a manager, the times I have gone back on the box, the lessons I learned as a producer or as a supervisor have made me a much more efficient worker and managing myself as well. So I'm curious, what books would you recommend that you found to be really insightful, whether management or anything at all?
Well, I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but whenever I find a topic that I'm interested in, I just don't have any interest in, I don't have any knowledge of, I actually go for the dummies books, the such and such for dummies, right? Or the 10-minute manager, or the really the sort of things that most people consider are just not going to be that impactful. But one of the things, I was taking a Series 65 and I just said, oh, wow, I've never went and got an MBA. I've done a lot of business. So let me go get a book on what it means to be an MBA. And I almost always go for the beginner's guides or the summary guides. And the reason I found those to be very useful is they tend to give me the right questions. And then I can dive deeper into the things that I really have an interest in. And fortunately nowadays, I mean, fortunately or unfortunately, I don't think I've read most help books like cover to cover in years now. And it's mostly because there's a summary that I can find online that gives me kind of the big concepts. And then I drill in and dig in, and I find an article and I dig into the article. And it's more about, because of the not just the internet, but how much stuff is available and how well it's been categorized. I just find you can be much more efficient than reading a book cover to cover. It's very satisfying to finish a book though. So most of the time, somebody tells me, you know, what I hear in a conversation. Oh, security is basically a contract, and a contract is governed by the Howey Rule. And I'm like, the Howey Rule? What's that? And then you go and you read about it and you go, well, that's really interesting, but how's that apply? And then you read some case law, and then suddenly you find yourself, you know, no attorney here, but you go, oh, okay, I understand. I get a lot better now what that context was. That kind of diving deep is, I think, what I do now most of the time. I don't generally spend time getting a book and going cover to cover.
Yeah, that's some advice I've heard from a few other people too, and so kind of different, but you know, rather than consuming a whole book, it's more about looking through the contents and then looking for the bits that you do want to deep dive into, rather than looking at necessarily the big picture. Plus, these days, publishers tend to pay more based on sometimes the page count or word count. So that sometimes means that people go for filler rather than saying, well, you know, here's the bullets that you need to really focus on. So there are websites like Read It For Me, and there's another one that I paid for like a lifetime subscription to, that also have like a 10-minute summary of every book, which sometimes is a good way of looking at whether you want to actually make the investment of, you know, reading for a week or two.
Exactly. When I was younger, I used to just voraciously read things, and I could read pretty quickly. So I'd read a book, just read it. And that was great, but the internet changed all of that, right? It's like, I don't need to do that anymore to get the core ideas. And at some point, even Cliff Notes and stuff like that, but not every book, especially a new book that's just come out, usually don't have that in the past. Nowadays, it's great because any book that comes out that's hitting the top of the charts or anything that says, hey, this is some great insights, almost within minutes, there's somebody who's summarized it and covered up the big ideas, and then giving you alternative reading. Most of the time you can just go to Wikipedia, look down at the references, and go click on those, and they'll give you tons of detail. It's super fast. Like somebody's already done all that job of curating the ideas for you. You know, why go out and kill yourself and do that all yourself? And versus the opposite, which is when I do read for pleasure, I don't want to read the Cliff Notes. I don't want anybody to tell me the ending, because that's the fun of enjoyment of actually exploring, experiencing it. And I read incredibly slowly when I'm reading for enjoyment versus when I'm reading for knowledge. So.
Yeah, that's funny how that works. You mentioned before questions, and that was actually something I wanted to ask you about too, is like, let's say, again, looking at opportunity and opportunity cost, when you are looking at whether it's a new position or something you want to invest in, whatever it might be, what type of questions do you typically default to when you're trying to find out more about what they're doing or about, you know, what they're offering?
For investors looking to invest in me, or I'm trying to understand the context?
Yeah, so I'm trying to figure out the best way to kind of condense this, but I guess, like, let's just say that younger you looking at moving to a new company and taking a position, just to put in context for other people.
Sure.
Yeah, like what typically are the go-to questions you might ask?
The thing that I want to know first and foremost, and let's talk about compensation. I think it's important. I'd want to know that I'm making enough that I'm not worried about covering expenses and bills and lifestyle that I have at the moment, so that I'm not distracted by taking that. I feel like that's taking too much risk. And the advice I would give to most people is figure out what your floor is and make sure you're at least getting paid enough net to where you're not struggling, because that can really be consuming. And that's actually the lesson of Westwood back in the day was, you know, it was challenging because we had to make at least enough to keep the lights on. And I think that's true of any new venture that you're going to be going into, is make sure you've got your bases covered. And you might want to build a little bit of buffer in there, because we all tend to be a little optimistic. Oh, I can make it on this. And then understand what it is you're hoping to gain, and clearly articulate that delta to whoever it is that you're working with or looking to go work for. Because from a comp point of view, you don't want to be in a position where, you know, your expectation is you're going to make the company $100 million and you're going to get 10 million of it, and their expectation is they've paid you a lot of money to make them $100 million. Thank you very much. right? And they're not going to give you any of it, right? There's can be very big differing opinions of what that is, and be clear about that so that there's no misunderstandings down the road, because it's exhausting from both ends to feel like you're being under appreciated, or you're constantly going back to the well, right? Those are both very frustrating ends. So that's from a comp point of view, but I don't think those are the questions I normally ask, because usually those are just very perfunctory. You just figure them out pretty quickly. I think the questions I really ask are, what is it you expect me to do? What are the outcomes you're looking for? And then ask myself the hard question is, do I think I can do that? Do I feel comfortable and confident that I can be successful? And if I do, what am I going to need from them to be successful? So, okay, if you want me to do that, then I need this level of autonomy. I need a single report. I need the ability to hire who I want to hire, or whatever those conditions are. So you can break it down into sort of tactically, these are the things that are going to be really important to me for me to be successful in this role.
I love that. And I guess just following on from that, like, let's say when it comes to negotiating, which again, I think this is one of those things that I think a lot of people get wrong too, that they feel that negotiating your salary or anything else, it's going to be an argument. And the secret to negotiating is to cross your arms and say, I'm only taking this, and actually make like a really awkward situation, rather than realizing that, first of all, negotiating is, part of the process and it's a conversation. But also, if you wanted to touch on other ways to creatively negotiate, rather than it always being salary, if they can't meet that, then how you can sometimes look for compensation elsewhere.
Yeah, and if it is salary, I don't think it's an uncomfortable conversation. You just have to be very honest about, here's where I'm at. I need to be able to do this. If I can't do that, then I'm going to be distracted. From both sides of it, I think it's important to basically say, what do I have to do to get what I want? Right. So as a person looking for a job, instead of saying, when I hear people say, well, cost of living went up, I need to make more money, I'm like, ooh, I hate the logic there, right? Just because things went up doesn't necessarily mean I have to pay you more, or that anybody should pay you more. Instead, when I'm looking to get a change in compensation or a new opportunity, I always say, okay, what do I have to do to earn this? This is where I want to be. How do I earn that? Yeah, and I flip the table around and I say, okay, I hear you. You want to make $200K a year. Great. I understand that's what you want. The role that you're in right now pays this range. Maybe it's 150, 140. And I will do everything I can to give you those opportunities. But I can't promise you you're going to get to that point. I can only promise you that I will do what I can to give you the opportunity to make that point. And I think that's the right and healthy way to think about it. And similarly, when I used to run a big team of artists, and people say, well, I don't have any time in my day to work on my career. And I'm like, okay, so let's be clear. I'm paying you to do a job. I'm paying you to get this work done. It should be reasonable, and we should agree on what that is. It's not my responsibility to invest in your career, right? That's not my responsibility. I'll help you, but I'm not going to say, oh, you only have to work 30 hours a week, so 10 hours a week, you can work on your portfolio. No. That's not the deal. The deal is your career is your responsibility. And if you want to work on it after hours, work on it in between, work on it when there isn't a pressure, because honestly, if you're not doing that, are you really building your skills? And then finally, my thoughts on raises and increases is, if somebody comes to me and says, well, I'd like to make 10% more, I'm like, do you think you're 10% more efficient? Do you think you're 10% better in quality? Can you quantify that? And if you can't, and you feel like you're just doing okay, I mean, fogging a mirror is not an excuse for a raise. It's an excuse maybe for, if you're doing at least what you're expected to do, it's an excuse for continuing to be paid, but it's not automatically everybody just gets raises. That's not realistic. Businesses don't automatically get paid more for their services. They have to provide more value, or they don't get paid more.
How often do you tend to put yourself in the other people's shoes? Because a lot of times whenever someone's asked me about how to get a raise, it's typically to make yourself more valuable. So in other words, as you mentioned before, if you're saying I want more money, it's more about, well, rather than you guessing like, hey, I'm working more hours, or hey, I went and learned how to code, even though there's no benefit to it in this context. Sometimes it's more about just asking them like, what do I need to do in the next 3 months to be more valuable to you? And then have that contingency set up of, okay, so if I were to in fact learn the code, not be a dick around my workmates, all the things that somehow are being displayed negatively, if I were to do these things, then would you agree to, that I'm worth this much more money? At least then you're setting definable goals that you can go after that everyone agrees to.
Yeah,
But
I think
yeah.
I think it's getting that verbal contract in place and say, and I think it's fair to ask an employer or even a partner, hey, what in your opinion, what would I have to do to reach this goal? What kinds of things? What would you want to see? And that's a very fair question, and it changes the conversation. It changes from I want, I need, to what can I do? How can I prove? And it becomes a healthy conversation. And I think on the negative side too, as a manager, I don't know who's listening to this podcast, but if you're a manager, if you're going to give criticism to somebody, it's very hard to hear criticism, especially if you're feeling underappreciated. In my experience, oftentimes the person who's underperforming is also the person who feels underappreciated. It's a very strange correlation, and sometimes I think that might be causal, not just correlated. So what I always try to do, especially if I have a hard conversation with somebody, and I want, especially if I want to retain them, I try to find the things that they're doing well, the things that I feel good about, the things that make me value them. And I very much start with, okay, here's where you're doing great. Here's the things that I value. Here's some great personality traits you have and everything else. And it would be better if you could do these kinds of things or have these kinds of outcomes. And then here's some of my suggestions of how you might do that. But I'm all ears as to what you might do to accomplish those same goals. And it becomes a constructive conversation about how I can get more out of what I need so I can give you what you need versus, hey, you're just not doing a good enough job, buck up and work harder. Those just are not, people don't hear that very well, and they generally they check out.
Yeah, that's such great advice. I guess just on that topic, what advice would you give to someone, let's say if they're, in a mid-level position and they're looking to, move up and get the company, the studio, whatever it might be, to invest in them. Let's say that they want to kind of pivot slightly into a different area, that there needs to be a little bit of faith there. Let's say that you're an artist, but you want to be a technical artist or something like that, and support the team more, to kind of stay consistent with that. I'm just kind of curious, what would be your take on how to approach that and get people to actually side with you on, hey, okay, this sounds like a great idea, let's get behind it.
Yeah, and maybe it's a twist on the old adage, dress for the job you want, not the job you have, right? The twist on that would be, do the job you want to do, not the job you're paid to do, or in addition to the job you're paid to do, is probably the best advice I would have, which is if you fancy yourself a technical artist and you're a creative artist, go do some technical things. Do them on your own if the company won't give you the opportunity. But at the first possible opportunity at the company you're at or with the group you're at, try to get at least one technical thing that you can do, and be humble, be honest about it. Hey, I'm not much of a technical artist. I haven't really been, in the business of manufacturing or creating, complex and efficient shaders. But you're really great at that. You go to somebody who is good at it, mentor again, and say, would it be possible for me to help you? I'm happy to contribute the time. And I know I'll get it wrong, and I really appreciate it if you just help me understand how this works. And I'll be some of your eyes and ears, or some hands. Ultimately, as long as you're giving them some value and you're working really hard, you'll learn a new skill, and it'll be recognized. Whining and complaining about not having it, I'm not giving the opportunity. It's like, opportunities are rarely just doled out, handed out like playing cards. Or most often, you have to articulate, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to be successful. And then, fight for the opportunity. I
love that. It's kind of like one of my biggest frustrations when people complain about not being paid what they're worth after they've accepted their salary, and they feel they got to do minimal effort. I want to respect your time. If I could ask one more question, I guess it would be, how do you typically nurture artists, let's say, to convince them to take more ownership of the work that they're doing, rather than showing up and doing the minimal, actually get behind what they're doing and really believe in their role?
Well, again, I think you start with the very first thing is compliment the work they're doing in the space that they're at, and be very, very clear about what you like about what you like. It's very rare that somebody who's professional and competent has been hired is terrible at everything. They're going to be good at something. And so, recognizing what that is, and the way to nurture it is to say, wow, you are really fantastic at modeling. You just find a great efficiency, and you create dimensions and things that are just really lovely, and when you see the object in the right lighting and everything else, it's fantastic. You could spend some more time on texturing, or you could spend more time on understanding materials or something like that, because honestly, your models are just not singing as much as they could if you were just a little bit more skilled at lighting or things. Even if you're not going to be the final lighter, just the ability to do that, just to see how your models are interacting with the light, would be a good thing. And then encourage the exploration and the growth, because I think, and that's if somebody wants to grow in that direction, wherever you're looking to push them, encourage the growth in that direction, because I think people, they want to please others and they want to succeed. And artists are all about ego. We're all out there putting ourselves out there. The yin and the yang of that is you're putting something of yourself in everything you do, which is wonderful when it's successful and really painful when it's not. So it's important to recognize that and encourage people to take risks. Don't be too hard when it comes to criticism. Be constructive.
I love that. Again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. No, honestly, this has been really awesome. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this again. And yeah, I mean, maybe a year from now, if you don't mind, I'd love to hit you up again, because you're a huge wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, check in anytime. I'm happy to give you some feedback. So take care.
Awesome, man. Thank you.